and welcome to Jolineknitsalot. This is my show about knitting and crafting and the things I get up to here in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. How are you doing? How have your last couple of weeks been treating you? I feel like I've had quite a few things going on. Let me catch you up. Last weekend in Edmonton, on the long weekend in August, which is the first weekend in August, we celebrate Heritage Days, which is a festival sort of meant to celebrate all the different cultural and national, more cultural, I would say, groups in and around Edmonton. Canada is made up of all sorts of groups of people who have come here from different places. So we like to celebrate all of the cultures who live in this area, including the Indigenous people who were the first peoples of this land. So Heritage Days is a great way to share your culture in terms of dress, I guess, national dress of all of these various different cultural groups, as well as music and dance and food. Food is the big draw for us. This year, it was kind of a rainy, long weekend, and so my younger daughter and I managed to make it out just on the Monday, and we sampled some of our favorite foods, which I'll show you some pictures of here. We've been going to Heritage Days since before we had kids, and it's one of our favorite festivals of the year. As a kid, I danced at Heritage Days at the Ukrainian Pavilion. I did Ukrainian dance. So it's very much a part of summer for me, and I really enjoy going every year. So we started it with some Dutch pancakes, which are these tiny little beautiful puffs of buttery pancake goodness, absolutely covered in icing sugar. I should have started out by telling you that Heritage Days is really like carb forward. Most of the foods are very carbohydrate centric or meat on a stick. So you can go kind of two ways. The first thing we had was the Dutch pancakes. Then we went to Bosnia to have a dish called cevapi. My husband's family is from Croatia, and cevapi is sort of a dish that is served in a lot of those countries around that area. Croatia, Serbia, Bosnia, they all have their sort of take on this food. And you see that a lot at Heritage Days. A lot of people do spring rolls just in different ways, empanadas in different ways, baklava in different ways, pierogies in different ways. And cevapi is a very popular dish. And so we had to make sure we had that because that was Lily's like must-have dish of the festival. So we shared one of those, and then we had some lovely crepes sort of rolled with cooked apple from the Ukrainian Pavilion, which I'd never had before, which were very nice. And then we rounded it all off with some baklava to take home and share with the rest of our family. So hopefully I've shared some pictures of all those foods with you. As ever, it was delightful, and there was lots of people out despite the rainy conditions. And if you're ever in Edmonton on a long weekend or the first weekend in August, Heritage Days is one of my favorite things of the summer. And then the following week, we had a Canadian author in Edmonton. Her name is Anna Hunter. I've probably spoken to you about her in the past. Anna Hunter is the shepherdess and owner of the Long Way Homestead, which is a sheep farm where she offers educational opportunities for people who want to learn how to look after sheep. I think she calls it sheep camp. So in the summer you can go and you can learn how to be a sheep farmer or a shepherd. She also does a lot of dyeing with natural products, and she teaches that on her farm. She has a mini mill on her property where she mills her own yarn, as well as yarns from other sheep producers in Western Canada. And so she's really a force of nature. She's just amazing. She does so many things, and she's written a book. And so right now she's on a book tour, and I was lucky enough to be at the first event of the book tour at Little Blue Fiber Studio. Subsequently, she had 2 nights at the Fiber Nook, which is in Edmonton. We're so lucky to have really fabulous yarn stores that sort of specialize in different things. It's a Little Blue Fiber Studio. Does a bit of knitting, but they kind of do a bit more in terms of embroidery, spinning, felting, like felt she does a lot of felting kits and has a lot of supplies for felting, as well as spinning. And so that's kind of their niche. Fibernook is definitely more of a yarn store that focuses on local makers. And so Anna did a couple nights there talking to local makers just about the yarn industry in Canada, why it is the way it is currently, and maybe some things we can do or think about in terms of improving the state of yarn in Canada. So according to Anna, 90% of the wool produced in Canada is shipped away. It's not processed here to be knit by local knitters. It is sent away to be used either in industrial sort of uses, in furniture, in rugs, in other uses, maybe insulation and different uses for wool. But it sort of gets lost in the great shuffle, right? Like in the great industrial void. We don't really know what happens to a lot of Canadian wool. And so if you are Canadian looking for locally sourced yarn, it can be very hard to find. So Anna talks a lot about that in her book, which is called The True Cost of Wool. So I will link to all of Anna's great things in the show notes below if you're interested in the wool industry in Canada. She has 2 books actually, but I will link to all of that in the show notes below. She's a fabulous speaker, and I've been fortunate enough to have met Anna in different at different events over the years, usually Knit Cities, but sometimes other events too. And she's always lovely and always kind, and she's just an amazing and super interesting person to listen to, as a lot of people are when they're really passionate about a subject. And Anna is definitely passionate about sheep and wool, and their I guess place in the environment. She talks a lot about being a steward of the land and how sheep can be a really great way of healing land. And so that was really interesting. And just also a really passionate resource for different types of wool and wool in Canada. So if you get the chance to hear Anna talk, I would absolutely recommend it. So I heard her on Tuesday. Thursday of this week, I went to Edmonton Folk Fest. Edmonton Folk Fest is another great thing. If you're in Edmonton in August, go to Heritage Days and the long weekend, take a few days off in the middle, then go to the Folk Fest, which is always the second weekend in August. It takes place Thursday night, Friday night, and then all day Saturday and Sunday. And it is, it's huge. This is its 46th year. And it takes place at the bottom of a ski hill. So there's stages all over, and then people sit on the ski hill on tarps all the way up. And as the evening goes on and it gets darker, we light candles and sit and listen to amazing music on the hill. And people often talk about the hill when they talk about Folk Fest. Last night, on Thursday night, we heard Asanabe, who is, I believe, a Canadian artist. He was the opener. And then Serena Ryder, definitely a Canadian artist who I think a lot of people, if you're from Canada, you probably have heard of Serena Ryder. And then we heard Rainbow Kitten Surprise, which was my younger daughter's pick. She really wanted to hear them sing. So we were at Folk Fest till late, and I'm a little sluggish this morning, but I'm happy to be here to talk to you a little bit about yarn and knitting today. I will be back at Folk Fest for the last day of the festival this year, and I'll tell you all about that next time. But one of my favorite creators, Naked and Frayed, who does embroidery kits for Edmonton, you've seen some of the kits, one of the kits that I did. I'll show you it here. It's one of the famous bridges here in Edmonton. She's done a couple kits for Folk Fest that I'm hoping to pick up and then add to my collection of local stitcheries. And if I do manage to get one, I'll share that with you next time. So in between all the festivals that I've been attending and loving, I have been continuing to spin. So I'll show you a little bit of the spinning. I don't want this podcast to become all about spinning because my life isn't all about spinning, but I'll just show you some of the things I've made. And if you have suggestions of ways to use handspun, I would love to hear them here. I think the last time I hadn't quite finished this little bundle of joy. So this is some merino, 100% merino. And I did a 2-ply. And I'm thinking that this yarn is probably somewhere between a sport and a DK. At this point, I feel like it's still a little bit I'm not going to say thick and thin, but it's not super consistent. Although it is, every skein of yarn I make is an improvement on the last. And so that's been really interesting for me as a beginner knitter or spinner. And it's also been very motivating because I know that every time I start a new spin, I'm getting better. And so that's pretty great. So this is, the color is called Luna Moth. It's 100% merino. And I don't know how much this is. It may be 100 meters. I'm having a hard time gauging how much yarn I actually have, but it's probably about 45 grams. Then the next one I did, again, 100% merino. And this one is a bit of a different colorway. It's called Champs-Élysées. And again, you can see some thick and thin bits and really interesting colors because this fiber was a lot more variated in terms of its coloring. Again, I'm thinking it's between a DK and a sport, probably more DK, this one. So it'll be interesting to see what I can make with that. Although I think I have a little bit more of this one. This, again, maybe 100 meters. I don't actually know. And then I have a yarn that I just plied, and it just needs to be wound up and given a bath and all of that good stuff. So it's this one, and this, I'll show you the bottom of the turtle, if you will. This again it's the same fiber coloring as this one. I think it'll look a little bit different just because of how it was spun. But this I feel is sport weight, like a pretty solid, heavy fingering sport weight as a 2-ply. And that I feel like is a really sweet spot for me because I think my goal is to spin something that reminds me of spin cycle yarns. I'll never be as good as spin cycle yarns, but if I could make something that I could use in place of spin cycle, then that opens up a lot of patterns to me. It just, I guess it's a little bit more straightforward for me to substitute this hand spun for something like dyed in the wool, because there's a lot of patterns using dyed in the wool, which I think this would be a pretty good substitute for that. I just have to, as I said, skein it up and give it a wash and all that good stuff. But I'm really happy with how this one turned out. Here's the top. And I feel like I'm getting pretty good at winding the yarn to make it look pretty. This spindle was made for me by my husband. Not too shabby, hey? Some of you may remember that my husband and I embarked on a mission to make a 3D printed sock machine. And we did. I have 2 actually fully functional 3D printed sock machines that I don't really use that much, if I'm being completely honest, but I have them. And I was really happy to have figured out how to do that. And so now, actually, if you are interested in making yourself a 3D printed sock machine, I'll link to some of my videos in the show notes below. I believe I did 3. One was how to build it, one was how to crank a tube on it, and then one was how to turn that tube into a sock. So if you're interested, I will link those videos in the show notes below. But he has been dabbling in 3D printing here and there, and he's been making things. But as I began spinning, I realized that you can print your own Turkish spindles or other spindles as well. And so I asked him to make me one, which he did, and I had used it. But it held 50 grams of fiber, which is what this is, but it really filled the arms of the spindle. And so I asked him if he could make me a bigger one. And the great thing with 3D printing is you can just take an existing file, which are often available for free on different websites. The one that I have used the most is called Thingiverse. I will link in the show notes below. And you can just take those files and print them on your 3D printer. And you can also manipulate them in certain ways. So I could take the original spindle that I had that was filled by 50 grams of fiber, this much fiber. And I just asked him to make me a spindle that was 120% of the original. So if the original is 100%, this is 120%, so it's bigger. And I think you can see I do have room to add more fiber. So that is something that I'll be playing with, I think, next. I'm going to try and spin 2 sets of 50 grams as like a 50-gram single ply, a 50-gram single ply, and then I'll make a 2-ply of those 2 together. At some point, I'm going to have to attempt a 3-ply. I realize that. I've just been having so much fun doing what I'm doing right now that I don't want to kind of mess with things. I am interested in trying chain plying, which is a way of making a 3-ply yarn, which means when you spin, I make if I'm taking the fiber and I'm spinning it originally, I'm making a ply. When I talk about 2 plies, that means that I took 2 of those plies, or in my case, I pulled from the inside of this little turtle and the outside, and I plied them together to make a 2-ply, which is what this current yarn is, a 2-ply. Chain plying is a way of making a 3-ply, so 3 strings wound around each other, but without needing 3 separate sources of plies, if that makes sense. So I can have 1 ball of a single ply, and I can make a 3-ply yarn out of that. I haven't attempted that. And if you know of links to a good tutorial on how to do chain plying, I would love to hear about it. But anyway, here's the continuation of my spinning journey. And I'm really enjoying doing it. I find it quite meditative, and it's satisfying to see the progression, especially when I look at my original spinning, which actually let's get to right now, because this is something that I finished in the last couple of weeks. As I was spinning up all this yarn and learning and trying to become better and practicing, I thought it would be a good idea to knit up my original yarn. Now I knew that my first yarn was very thick and thin and crazy and wacky, but I wanted to try knitting it. I have made a lot of mug cozies. I really like them. I keep them in different bags. And when I go out and if I get a coffee, I just use my own instead of using the cardboard one. It's just a little bit more cozy, and I find them very useful. I also use them for cold beverages, because sometimes the cup is all icy and cold, and if you put a little sweater on it, then your hand doesn't get cold and sweaty. So this is the first one that I made, and I want to show you this because I think you can see here just how thick and thin that is. I'm pretty sure the pattern I used was by Susan B. Anderson, who is a fabulous knitting designer, but this is a very simple little pattern. It's just 2x2 ribbing. I used 5.5mm needles, which at the time I thought was maybe tight, but it's actually, I think it's okay for a gauge. And that's the other thing I'm finding interesting knitting with handspun is you don't really know what gauge it is. So I need to learn more about wraps per inch, which is a way of sort of placing your yarn in a weight, like maybe DK or sport. So I need to learn a little bit more about that. Anyway, I cast on 28 stitches. I used 5.5mm needles, and I created this mug cozy. And then I still had a fair amount of yarn left, so I made another one. And I find this very interesting because I think you can see how this yarn is very thick and thin, especially with some quite lumpy bits. And this one, while it is still thick and thin, it's more consistent and it is thinner. And it may be hard to see on camera on my hands, but if I hold them this way, I think you can see how much chonkier this yarn is as compared to this one. And so this must have been the beginning of my spinning journey. And then as the skein developed, I improved as a spinner. And so this yarn is thinner and more consistent than this one. Super interesting. And I think a really fun use of my very first handspun. I do have a very small nugget left, which I'm sure isn't enough for anything, but it's a very sweet little reminder of where I started. And now I do have some other handspun that I would like to start using just in little projects. I think I'm going to try making a little basket out of one of them. and I'm not sure what I'm going to do with the other one. It's merino, so it's a little bit more drapey, and I'm not sure it will hold up as well as this, which was Corriedale, which is my first spinning. So watch for me to try using my hand spun in different ways and play with it, and I think hopefully learn a little bit about the yarn that I'm making by using it in knitting. So in the past couple of weeks, I also finished the sweater that I'm wearing, which I should have told you about at the beginning of this episode. I don't know what I was thinking of. This is the Pop Rocks tee, the short sleeve version. I also did a long sleeve version, which I will show you here, or here. And I wore the rainbow long sleeve one to Folk Fest, which was super fun because we were seeing Rainbow Kitten Surprise, and I was wearing a rainbow, and it was cool, so it was kind of a good choice. Anyway, the Pop Rocks tee is a pattern by Tanis Lavallee, who's a Canadian designer, and also part owner of Tanis Fiber Arts, where they make colorful yarn. I used some fingering weight yarn from Ancient Arts, which is a Calgary-based yarn dyer. This yarn is called Little Nettle Soft, fingering, I believe, and it is made out of merino wool and nettle fibers, nettle being a plant. And so it does have a little bit of a sheen. It's soft, but I wouldn't say it's super soft. And I feel like this t-shirt is, I love this shape. Let me just show you. Ta-da! It's a little on the short side because I'll be honest with you, I went a little short on the yarn, which I knew going in. For my size, I needed a little over 1 skein of each of these to make it as the pattern was written. And I didn't want to be buying 4 skeins of yarn, so 2 of each color, to make a t-shirt when I was pretty sure I could eke out a t-shirt in 1 skein of yarn. So I did. And it's a little shorter than I would like. However, it's totally wearable, especially with a higher waisted pant. It's cute. I love the shape of it. The sleeves, again, fabulous. I won't go too much into it, but this boxy t-shirt shape is something I've really been enjoying this summer, and I've knit a few things in this shape, and I'm really liking it. Again, this is the Pop Rocks tee by Tanis Lavallee. And I picked up this yarn at the Prairie Fiber Festival that was held in Olds this year. It was the first one held in Olds, and it was a really lovely event. So if you're looking for a spring yarny event in the greater Alberta area, look for the Prairie Fiber Festival in Olds next year. And if you're looking for a fiber event in the greater Alberta area, there will be a Prairie Fiber event in Lacombe, which is about an hour south of Edmonton. And that is held in September 13th this year. And I will be there with bells on. Now, I have been knitting on a couple of knitting projects, and I would say they're sort of at their midpoints. I have been working on the Ooey Gooey sweater. I think last time I showed you the yarn that I had chosen. And if you remember, I had some yarn that I wanted to use from Stash. It was some Magpie Fibers Nest, which actually I believe is also a Corriedale. Speaking of Corriedale, let me just check. I was thinking about this as I was knitting on it the other day, that it might be the same fiber that I'm learning to spin on. Yes, so this is 100% non-superwash Corriedale. And the Nest Sport, that's the label, Magpie. It is 350 yards and 100 grams. And I believe the color is Magpie. I have had 4 skeins of this yarn in my stash for years. Probably 3 years. And I've really been wanting to use it, and I just have not had the right pattern. And so when this pattern came along, and I was looking in my stash for yarns I could use, I realized that I could pair some spin cycle that I had with this yarn in a way that I really liked. And so I'm just really happy to be using this yarn out of my stash. The spin cycle, I think, is looking really great. So why don't I show you what that looks like? I am using the Mississippi Marsala colorway, which is a lot of like warm earthy tones, oranges, reds, some deep burgundies, and also it's got some lighter tones, some taupes and some blues. And so that really, I think, worked well with this pattern. So here's the cast on. The original skein of spin cycle that I had that I really wanted to use is actually quite thin. And so it does look a little bit, I think you can see a little thin there. However, I think it looks really good, the colors. Interestingly, when I got to these welt sections here, these are the welts, which are not difficult to knit. Andrea Mowry does do a great video on how to knit them. They're not a difficult technique. I would say that they're fiddly, and I know some people who are also knitting this thought the same. That should not in any way deter you from knitting them if you want to. Just know that the round where you're finishing the welt will take more time. It just will. It's not difficult. You just need to be picking up stitches, and so it takes time. But interestingly, where the welts happen, the spin cycle color shifted, as it does, to a color very similar to my main color. So these welts are done in the main color, but the colors behind the welts are actually the contrast color. It's just that it shifted to be similar. And I actually don't mind it. I would say that area is sort of low contrast. The welts do stand out, maybe not as much as some other sweaters, but I do think it looks really good. And I love the colors together. I just think it's really pretty. When I got to these dots, boop, boop, my skein of dyed in the wool was shifting to very yellow, and like a really almost lemony yellow. So I cut the first skein and I started the second skein to keep this more orangey, earthy tones. I just thought the yellow would be too jarring. And so I have a little nugget that I will maybe use for something else. I don't know. It's gone to live in my stash of dyed in the wool odds and sods. And yeah, so now I've got the sleeves on hold. This pattern, oh, look at when I do that, it looks really good. Oh, good job, Joline, picking colors. I chose to do the bust adjustment. So for this pattern, Andrea has made a suggestion that if you are fuller busted, as I am, you could move stitches, instead of being like even, the same number of stitches for the front and the back, you could move essentially some of the stitches from the back to the front so that your back is not as wide, but your front has a little bit more fabric. It ultimately doesn't really change. It doesn't change the size of your sweater. It just changes where your sleeves are. So basically it takes the sleeves, instead of plunking them right on the sides, it moves them slightly to the back. And if you were fuller busted, that allows a little bit more, I guess, fabric across here. So I'm giving it a try. It's only about 2 inches that you're gaining to the front and taking from the back, which I think will be fine. I think the fit will still be fine. And the sweater is, I am making it with positive ease. So I'm not worried about it being too snug, but it'll be interesting to see how I like the fit with this bust adjustment. And now I'm just knitting down the body and trying to figure out how long to make this sweater before I start the 3.5 inches of ribbing at the bottom. One of the things I think about when I'm knitting Andrea Mowry sweaters is how long to knit the body. Andrea designs sweaters for herself, and she must be very short-waisted because her sweaters are often about 10, maybe 12 inches from the underarm to the hem. And I'm not sure that that is the length that I prefer. So for most sweaters, I just sort of knit to a length that I feel comfortable with. Often that's something like 14 inches. And then if that's the total length from armpit to hem, then I will stop the body stockinette or whatever it is early, knit that ribbing at the bottom, and then go on. This sweater has 3.5 inches of ribbing at the bottom, which makes me think I don't think I want my sweater to be that long with 3 inches of ribbing at the bottom. So I'm thinking I'm going to add 2 inches of length to the sweater, which I'm almost at now. And then I'm going to put it on some tried on tubing and I'll see what I think. I want to have a sweater that I'm happy to wear. And I really loved this sweater when it came out. So it's just going to be a matter of figuring out the right length so that I'm not fussing with it. Because I think if it's a sweater that you're not happy with in terms of length, you may be pulling at it, or you may not necessarily reach for it unless you have exactly the right bottoms, trousers, pants, whatever, jeans. And I want it to be a sweater that I just reach for and will wear a lot. So I want to get the length to a point that I'm really happy with. So all that to say, I'm going to knit this sweater to 2 inches longer than Andrea recommends. I'll put it on some tubing and I'll try it on. And then I'll make an executive decision from there as to when to start the ribbing. But so far, it's been a really pleasant knit. I am looking forward to getting to the sleeves because the sleeves mean more color work. There's quite a color work section at the bottom, and it means playing with some more spin cycle. So I'm looking forward to finishing the body and moving on to the sleeves. And the last thing I've been knitting is the first patterns in Summerlee's Cuff Club Volume 2. If you have watched this channel before, you will know that I'm a big fan of Summerlee and all of her sock designs. Her colorwork cuff club was so much fun last year. I knit all the patterns and I love them all. And so this year, Summer has decided to introduce some different textures into the mix. So not all of the patterns will have colorwork. Some of them will have different textures. Maybe that means cables, maybe it means lace, maybe it means cables and lace. Maybe it'll be a knit and purl pattern, I don't know. There will be also some colorwork patterns. And so August kicked off with the first pattern, and there was 2 options. There was a cabled cuff, which just has a 2-stitch cable and then a plain sock. And then there was a colorwork cuff. And so I, as I think a lot of people will be doing, I just decided to combine them both into one fabulous sock. So I did the cabled cuff, I did the colorwork cuff, and I finished the first sock, which I'll show you now. I took the liberty of blocking it so that the colorwork would be evened out a little bit better. And I'm doing something I don't often do, and that's using a speckled sock yarn as the base of my colorwork. Just because I thought it would be a fun way to use some like odds and sods of some speckled yarn. And I think that the colorwork still stands out. This is not a heavily speckled, although it was getting heavily speckled towards the bottom of my foot. I think this sock turned out really pretty. So let me just show you the cable cuff. It's a 2-stitch cable, and Summer gives you instructions on how to do both knitting a cable with a cable needle as well as knitting without. I used some Cascade Heritage sock yarn. I believe that's an orchid colorway. And then this green here for the stems of the colors is Mossy Rock, I think. And then the background, or the main speckled yarn, is a Polka Dot Creek yarn that was a birthday colorway that I picked up when I was at their shop. I can't even remember when, maybe in March of last year. I've had this left over around for a while. I'm really glad to be using it. This has been a fun sock to do. The mini cable on the cuff, super interesting. And then switching to some color work, also very interesting. Beware, this chart does have a couple of rounds. It might be 2 rounds that uses 3 colors. That can be a little challenging, but not impossible. And then the rest of the sock is knit plain, and I put on a colorful toe. I had put out a video in July, just sharing all of the socks I made from the first volume of Summerlee's Cuff Club. I'll link it in the show notes below if you're super interested. But on that video, some people had asked me to show how I knit my colorwork socks. And so I do plan on doing just a little video. It's not a tutorial necessarily. I'll just share some of the things that I've learned about colorwork knitting and knitting colorwork socks. And I'll show you how I do it. And hopefully some people might find that interesting or useful. So in the interest of that, I have knit just the little cuff of the second sock and a few rows of plain knitting before I start the color work. So I'm hoping to have a video about how I knit colorwork socks out to you in the next week or two. And maybe you might find that interesting or helpful if you're trying to get into knitting colorwork socks, or if you're interested in joining the Colorwork Cuff Club, volumes 1 or 2. If you buy volume 1, you get all 12 months of socks, which is more than 12 colorwork cuffs, because some months had more than one cuff. You get the whole thing right out of the gate. If you sign up for volume 2, you will get a chart or 2 charts in your mailbox every month on the 1st. Sometimes it was a little earlier, and of every month for the next year, starting in August of 2025 and going right through to July of 2026. So maybe you'll join me in knitting some fun socks, one a month every year for the next year. This was really fun. Equally, you could do a sock like this that was just the mini cable and a plain sock, or you could do just the color work and a plain cuff. Summerlee had put out a little sort of video on Instagram how she was excited to be using speckled yarns for socks that have an interesting cuff. So if you had an interesting cuff, you might use a speckled yarn to make the plain stockinette knitting of the sock more fun. And I was thinking that that would also be a really good use for some of the self-striping sock yarns that I have in my stash. I could make a colorful, like a one color, interesting cuff, whatever that texture is, and then switch to coordinating or maybe not coordinating striping sock yarn for the rest of the sock. So I'm interested to see what the patterns are as they come out and how I might be able to use more yarns that I have collected, so I must like, but I've just been sitting on my stash waiting for the right opportunity, pattern. I'm not sure. But I just thought, because I don't have a lot of speckled yarns, self-striping might also be fun for the body of the sock. So let me know if you're taking part in volume 2 of the Cuff Club this year. Which pattern did you choose to knit? Or are you doing them both like me? And are you going to be working through some speckled yarns or some self-striping yarns, or you haven't decided yet? I'd love to hear in the show notes below. The last project that I don't have on my needles but will be soon is a sweater for my co-host and executive producer Blue the Corgi. I was fortunate enough to be asked to do a test knit. I had test knit for Stephen West before and made my doggo Blue a beautiful brioche sweater, which I will pop in the show notes, or I'll show you a picture here or here. And it was a really fun knit. I learned some techniques. I learned a little bit more about dog sweater knitting. And the sweater that I made for Blue, we have used in the winter when it gets quite cold here. I'm not sure that he necessarily needs a sweater for most of the winter, but we do get days when it's really, really bitterly cold. And so I do feel like putting an extra layer on him might just keep him a little bit cozier so we can get out and get a little bit of fresh air. Anyway, Stephen West is planning on putting out a new batch of puppy sweaters in the fall. And I'm going to be test knitting one of them, which I can't really tell you anything about, but I will just show you the yarn that I picked. The sweater pattern called for a DK yarn, but the gauge for that sweater was 20 stitches in 4 inches. And so I went with this yarn, which is technically a worsted, but I would say it's a light worsted. This is some Cascade Superwash, 220. Oop, you see that? There we go. I'm showing it to you upside down. Why didn't you say something? There we go. The reason I got this yarn is because it's a superwash, and my dog is a dog. Not only is he a dog, he's a lowrider, which means that his belly collects dirt and grit like nobody's business. So I needed something that I can throw in the washer. I don't mind pulling it out and laying it flat to dry. That's what I do with his current sweater that I made and hopefully just showed you. However, that one is made out of an acrylic yarn. So I throw it in the wash and then I lay it flat to dry. It dries super fast. And I imagine that will be the same for this. This is a super wash yarn. I won't be washing it every time he wears it, certainly. Especially in the winter, if it's just snow, it's often just wet. So I just can lay it flat to dry and that's just fine. So I will be knitting for the young fellow in this lovely Cascade 220 Superwash. Again, it is a worsted weight, but the gauge of the sweater that I need to be knitting matches the gauge of this yarn. So this yarn on the ball band says that it can be knit at 20 to 22 stitches in 4 inches on 4 to 4.5 millimeter needles. So it's sort of perfect for what is being asked for in this pattern. And washable yarn for the purposes of my dog knit was important. So I have 2 balls, which should be enough to knit the young fellow a sweater. And when the pattern is released, I will share that with you. But I will be just sort of working on it in the background. And hopefully I'll have something to show you and be able to share it with you in September. And that is all of the crafty goodness that I've been getting up to here at Jolineknitsalot. It's been a really fun last couple of weeks. I've had the opportunity to get together with my knitting group. I got to hear an author who I've known for quite some time and hear her speak about something she's super excited and passionate about. I got to eat some really great food and hear some great music. And so I hope that your summer has been filled with things you like to do too. I hope in the next couple of weeks you get the chance to do something you like to do, whether that's eating fabulous food, hearing music, working on all the crafts, or just enjoying some time for yourself. I know in the next couple of weeks, I plan on knitting a lot. Take care, and I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.